The radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. This is episode 83, recorded on Friday, February 24th from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
And on today's episode, we discuss the continued whitewashing of radical leftist Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But first, the headlines.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
I want to start with the biggest news story ever of all time. Breaking news. Fox News lies.
I have never heard anyone say that before.
But now we have official legal proof that they lie, not just regular proof. This all comes from the latest Dominion lawsuit against Fox News, where they just publicly released their complaint detailing in grave detail all of the crazy nonsense that Fox News has been spewing during the 2020 election and how they secretly lied and didn't care the entire time. It showed a wide variety of things, including how Fox News reporter Jackie Heinrich fact-checked Trump's claims about the 2020 election being stolen.
How dare she?
I know, right? And Carlson told Handy in text, quote, "Please get her fired. Seriously, what the F word? I'm not going to swear.
I don't need to bleep out.
I'm not going to make you bleep things. I'm actually shocked. It needs to stop immediately, like tonight. It's measurably hurting our company. The stock price is down. Not a joke."
That's what's really important here. The stock price, not the truth.
Exactly.
And I assume that is Tucker Carlson speaking to Sean Hannity.
That is correct.
Texting Sean Hannity.
The complaint also showed that Sidney Powell got the idea originally about Dominion voting systems from a random person who sent her an email.
Not a surprise, honestly.
And this person supposedly thought she was literally a ghost. And that Scalia was actually killed during a human hunting expedition.
We could only hope.
And text from different Fox News hosts like Hannity, Carlson, Ingram, all talked about how she was a wackadoodle crazy person and that she should not be trusted. They also kind of said the same thing about Rudy Giuliani, even though they kept having him on, and also Mike Lindell. So great. They knowingly had people on that they did not trust, that they were actually going to lie to the American public.
And Mike Lindell is now banned on Fox News because of this Dominion lawsuit.
Yeah. Even more telling, the complaint showed that Rupert Murdoch told Fox News CEO Suzanne Scott, quote, "Trump will concede eventually, and we should concentrate on Georgia." And he's referencing the Georgia runoff elections that happened after 2020.
That Democrats won both of.
Helping any way we can.
Yes, because their job is to help the Republicans.
Well, and again, that's the whole point of this, right? Is that we keep hearing over and over and over again, and I heard some other analysis about this, is that the danger of Fox News does not necessarily come just from Fox News, but from all the people who are outside of it that constantly try to validate it. We have this weird equivocation fallacy in the media today where it's just, you have to get the right's view on things. You have to get the right's. What about the conservative and the Republicans' viewpoint? We have to get there. We're fair and balanced, right? No. The whole point of Fox News is to just spread propaganda to help Republicans gain power. That's it.
And to make money, obviously.
Yes.
Capitalism.
There were also other reports about how Tucker Carlson and others actually feared Donald Trump, with one quote from Tucker Carlson calling Trump a demonic force, a destroyer.
Might be the only true thing Tucker Carlson has ever said.
So what do we do with this, Jason? I just want to share this with every single person who ever watches Fox News. That's all I want to do.
All they're going to say is, well, CNN, well, MSNBC. That's all you're going to get.
That makes me sad, and I don't like that. But I think you're right. Because at the end of the day, too, you won't hear Fox News talking about this at all. You will never hear any single concessions. You will just hear more doubling down at the end of the day. But let the record literally show Fox News is just a literal propaganda machine.
And hopefully they lose this lawsuit and it costs them a lot of money, which is, the thing they care most about.
$1.6 billion, man. Get them. Get them, Dominion.
Go Hugo Chavez.
In other news of rich, white, terrible people, the Mormon Church and its investment manager was initially fined $5 million by the SEC for concealing billions of dollars from its members and public interest.
What would Brigham Young think?
Good job.
And also, why did you let black people into the church?
For those of you who are unaware of this story, the LDS Church was concerned that disclosure of its portfolio and the way that the Mormon Church actually makes most of its money is from assets and investments. payments, which by 2018 had grown to approximately $32 billion, would have led to then negative consequences, quoting the SEC. Instead, the Mormon Church decided to file shell companies that purposely obscured the church's portfolio. Basically, investment managers who have $100 million or more in assets must report all stock holdings each quarter, but the LDS Church hid that wealth in 13 separate shell companies to avoid any disclosure rules, which is definitely illegal.
Well, until this case goes to the Supreme Court and then they rule that it's somehow religious freedom to hide your money
To hoard your billions of dollars.
shell companies. Up until then, it'll be illegal.
Hey, corporations are already people. Money is speech. We already know that monies have religions.
Yep, and closely held religious beliefs trump all law. So
Yeah. This actually goes from another complaint that was filed back in 2019, claiming that the Mormon Church had already amassed over $100 billion in charitable contributions from members. Keep in mind, this is also a church that requires you to give 10% of your wealth.
at least.
At least.
It's, the bare minimum is 10% tithing.
Right. And I really wish more and more people learned about the danger of the Mormon Church. We're still seeing it today where it's, those little wacky Mormons. Oh, they're so adorable. No.
The Book of Mormon musical portrays them as misguided but
lovable,
good-spirited. Yeah.
Where the Mormon Church is one of the richest and most powerful religions in the world.
And they do a lot of cult-like things. They shun members who leave the church. They basically insulate their members, especially in like Utah or Salt Lake City. You go to Mormon businesses, all of your friends are Mormon. You don't talk to anyone outside of that group. And the moment that you say anything that they disagree with or express any kind of doubts about the religion, you lose everything.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of social and financial pressure to stay within the church, or at least in the church's good graces. And there's a lot of abuse that goes on that gets covered up because of that exact reason as well.
Well, exactly. And again, this is just another bit of evidence that these organizations are constantly just scamming their own members, where we know that the actual executives of these types of organizations usually don't actually fully believe in what's going on, that they're intentionally trying to manipulate those below them. And the people below them usually are full-on believers, that they actually believe in some parts of this, or they're just unaware of these things actually happening, but they're just getting scammed full away. And I don't know what to do with a Mormon nowadays, where there's so much evidence that, one, it's always been a con, and it's always been a scam, even from its inception with Joseph Smith, all the way up until today. So what do you even do today to convince them that this is actually a big deal? Because it's just the same thing over and over again.
Try to convince anyone that their religion is fake. Good luck. You have better luck trying to convince conservatives that Fox News is a lie.
Actually, I'd agree with that. And now I'm sad again. Let's go with some happy news, huh?
Yes, let's go to some good news. The Wisconsin Supreme Court primary results. It's not the best news, but it's still good news. The two winners of the primary that will move on to the general election are personal choice, Janet Protasewicz, who got 445,196 votes, or 46.4, much higher than anyone else in the race. The next highest, and also advancing to the general election, Daniel Kelly, which is kind of a surprise. 232,316 votes, or 24.2%. Losing out in the primary election is Jennifer Darrow, wholly unqualified, but gained a lot of national attention after the Darrell Brooks trial, got 209,586 votes, or 21.9%. So losing out by just around 2% to Daniel Kelly. And unfortunately, because he's not a bad choice, it's just everyone seemed to immediately gravitate towards Janet Protasewicz, was the other liberal in the race, Everett Mitchell, at only 71,738 votes and 7.5%. Hopefully, he is, I think, the youngest, maybe closer to Darrow, I'm not sure, but he, at least just looking at the four of them, looks like the youngest candidate. So hopefully this is not the last time he will run for the state Supreme Court.
I agree.
So that sets up the showdown on April 4th. the most important election
Of the year.
of at least the last decade in Wisconsin politics between Janet Protasewicz and Daniel Kelly.
So let's talk a little bit about what you said before, though. Why did you think it was surprising that Daniel Kelly took the second spot?
Well, he did lose quite handily in his only other election, which was in 2020 when he again ran for the seat that he had been occupying, that he was appointed by Scott Walker, and it was not expected to be a close race, and he lost by like over 10% to Jill Karofsky. So not only that, the rise of Jennifer Doro following the trial that she used specifically to get some attention to run for the state Supreme Court, she seemed to have a lot of the energy and a lot of the support coming into the primary on the conservative side.
Well, and that's what I was kind of surprised about as well, where I just didn't hear a lot about Daniel Kelly. You heard so much about Jennifer Doro, both positive and negative, which we can talk about as well. But there was just a lot of support from conservatives around her. Now, Grant, I'm not like super well endowed in Wisconsin conservative circles, but I've never really heard tons of like excitement over Daniel Kelly. It was always all these crazy endorsements in like local politics were all going towards Jennifer Doro.
It really, Daniel Kelly's biggest feather in his hat was that he had the support of the U-Lines and that huge money group that they run.
I was just gonna say he had way more money.
Right. And that's why you saw all those negative Jennifer Doro ads. And you look at, if you can look them up on YouTube, and you look at the comments, and it's everyone complaining about liberals running these nasty campaign ads. And it's like, I hate to break it to you, but those are actually paid for by Daniel Kelly's supporters, not Janet Protasewicz.
Yep.
Her ads were all just talking about her.
Yep. Well, actually, not anymore, though. I actually saw it.
Now she has a Daniel Kelly attack ad.
Yeah.
I saw that one as well.
Which I'm happy to finally see.
But yeah, no one talked about Everett Mitchell, unfortunately. And all I saw were positive and negative Jennifer Doro ads and positive Janet Protasewicz ads.
I saw a couple of negative Janet Protasewicz ads. Not too many, though. But it was the same thing that you hit Jennifer Doro on, though. That was the problem. It was that like, all these different candidates that you were seeing on TV were always just like, oh, they let so-and-so go, and they're not tough on crime enough.
And that will hurt Daniel Kelly as well, I feel, because he was a defense attorney. While I actually think there should be more defense attorneys in higher levels of the law, when you're talking about being tough on crime, how can you do that when you essentially defended criminals?
I mean, that's what they did to Hillary Clinton.
So I do think it's for the best for Janet Protasewicz that Daniel Kelly won. One, he's not very charismatic. Oh. He's not very popular.
No, he is
in the state.
Well, and he's actually well known for not being likable now because of that crazy last election we had in 2020.
And he was extremely nasty to Jennifer Doro. She's already endorsed him. He said all during the campaign that he would refuse to endorse her if she won the nomination. So yeah, he's a very unlikable guy. The fact that this election is going to be primarily about abortion rights, because currently Wisconsin is under an anti-abortion law that was written 1 year after Wisconsin was made a state, pre-Civil War, in the mid-1800s, and Daniel Kelly supports that law and will not vote to overturn it.
Fully supports it.
And him being a man in that position is easier to attack than someone like Jennifer Doro, who at least would have the defense of, you can't tell me what women should do. I am a woman, versus someone like Daniel Kelly. He does, I think, have 3 daughters from the horrible video that I saw of them all singing like the national anthem.
God, yeah.
At a campaign event or a victory event.
That was that was at their party.
Yeah, but it is going to be easier to attack him on abortion. You know, Daniel Kelly, old white man, thinks that he knows best what you should do with your body. That kind of it's already been done, and it's easy to see where it's going to go, and I think it's effective.
I completely agree. So keep ready. We got a couple more months left. We can flip this court. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's 6 weeks. I mean, it's April 4th. Yeah, obviously honestly, make sure you vote. If you haven't yet registered to get an absentee ballot and you wish to vote absentee, do it right now.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of time.
No. Well, let's talk about that as well. So conservatives right now in Wisconsin are furious because not only did Janet Protasiewicz take the leading spot in this election, which was supposed to be a very low turnout, conservative-leaning election, right? It was a primary first and foremost, a primary where only the Wisconsin Supreme Court was like the only thing on the ballot for most of them.
It was, the only statewide election.
And it was in an off year because it's a special election. So not only did the liberal Janet Protasiewicz take the lead, she got more votes alone than both conservative candidates put together.
Yeah, very close on that. But certainly once you factor in the Everett Mitchell votes, then she's back up to being over 50%.
Correct.
Which, yeah, and if you look at, I think everyone except one of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court justices is a woman currently.
Yeah, except for Hagedorn.
So they do tend to perform very well in Supreme Court races for some reason in Wisconsin. I mean, I think it's a good thing, but it does have that precedent. I think 3 of the last 4 elections for state Supreme Court have been won by a woman, something like that.
Yep.
And I think, all of those things are positive. And yes, she's out fundraised everyone, but that is, again, just accounting the funds that were given to her, not the outside big money groups. Daniel Kelly actually spent more than she did. Well, not him. That's the whole thing. The Uline run outside group
supporting Kelly
spent more than Janet Protasiewicz did in this campaign. So that is something to be worried about. But the fact that the election is only in 6 weeks, how are they going to turn that around so fast? I will see.
Well, and I'm usually not a big fan of, bigger elections will support the liberal candidates. I'm not a huge fan of that. There's contested evidence.
High turnout favors Democrats.
I'm not.
Traditionally it is, but
be careful when you say it. That's all I'm going to say. But long story short is, I feel very happy seeing this result because it shows that in these very low-key turnout elections, Democrats have a good, solid base now in Wisconsin that will turn out.
Yeah, that are paying attention to what's going on, and they know when an election this important is upon us.
Right, because there's always going to be the people that are like, we may be able to get them to vote or not, we're not sure. But a lot of what campaigns do is just making sure that they have their active base constantly out voting all the time. And finally, we have Democrats who are now more active than your conservatives in Wisconsin.
Yeah, traditionally, Democrats rely heavily on the youth vote, which that's where the turnout is traditionally low.
Yeah.
And especially when you talk about, midterms, off years, primaries, the youth turnout in particular tends to be low.
Right.
So let's stay with the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, and we have some more good news.
Yeah. I actually didn't know about this until you posted it, so I was very happy you did.
Mm-hmm. It was a recent unanimous ruling by the State Supreme Court with no dissent. Lowe's Home Improvement Store was suing the city of Delavan to challenge the city's 2016 and 2017 property valuation of $8.9 million for one of its stores. The retailer claimed the valuation was excessive when compared to vacant big box stores.
That's the key.
And the proper value was closer to $4.6 million. And the issue here, really, and they lost. Lowe's lost the lawsuit.
Which I'm actually surprised, to be fully honest.
Right, with our conservative majority Supreme Court, they still were able to unanimously vote against Lowe's and for the city of Delavan. And what's really at issue here is dark store theory, which is something I'd never heard of before I saw this news story. But essentially, it says that because a lot of the money that goes into building one of these stores, like a Lowe's, Menards, Walmart, those types of things, because a lot of the money that goes into building those stores is specific to that brand, you shouldn't evaluate the value of the store based on how much money it costs, how much business they do. You should value the property tax value of the store, the property value, at what they stand to sell it at down the road to some other business that is going to have to completely retrofit the store. So essentially, like, you get the Spirit Halloweens that move into all these big empty stores around Halloween. Well, we want to pay taxes on what that sale is going to look like. That, and it's usually about half of, in this case, they wanted the valuation valuation at $4.6 million instead of $8.9 because they're assuming that, well, down the road, if we ever sell, another Lowe's isn't going to come in here and buy it. It's going to be a different store that's not going to value it as high, so we shouldn't have to pay the full valuation of our property, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's like saying, well, I shouldn't have to pay what you think my house is worth either. What happens, if I wreck the place and somebody has to come in and redo everything? Well, then the price would be a lot lower. So you should only look at houses that have had to be completely ripped apart and remodeled on the inside first. And that's how much I should be able to pay. And in fact, I'm going to sue you over that. In the last decade, Woodman, and this is just in Wisconsin, Woodman's, Menards, Lowe's, and Walmart have all filed dark store lawsuits challenging village and city property assessments. And the money, and some of them have won. Walmart in particular, I believe, won one of these lawsuits recently. And the money that these communities lose,
it's tremendous.
And it's not like they can just say, okay, well, we'll strip that out of the budget. They have to then take that $4 million, $5 million and get that from everyone else.
Yep.
So that drives up everyone else's property taxes. I saw statistics that said within the last 20 years, homeowners used to be responsible for about 32% of the overall property tax bill in a given community. But because of the rise of this dark store theory and all of these stores suing to get their property tax valuations lowered, that it's now currently at about 50%. So you're paying the same property tax bill as a $10 million store overall. And that's just ridiculous.
Well, and this is literally why you have Democrats saying big corporations should pay their fair share.
And not only, we know that they cheat about their income taxes. We've seen that. We had a president that literally
bragged about it.
Yeah, and refused to pay his fair share of income and still does, and doesn't think he did anything wrong. But now you've got these corporations also trying to evade the property taxes as well. So it was good to see that this was struck down, and hopefully, at least in Wisconsin, that will be the end of these lawsuits.
I sure hope so, man. And last but not least, today marks the 1-year anniversary of Russia invading Ukraine. Recently, there's been a lot of news about Biden doing a very secret trip out to Kiev, which is literally like in a war-torn area, and doing, I guess, all the right things a president should be doing. I don't know how much you've actually heard about that trip, Jason.
I just saw the news stores reporting that it happened. It left over the cover of night, didn't tell anyone until he was already back, that sort of thing.
Okay, good. So I guess a lot of it just kind of comes down to the politics and the optics of the whole thing. What are your thoughts on Biden doing this from what you do know? And what are your thoughts on actually, should he have done something else or should he have just stayed the course?
I think this is just standard foreign policy, right? You show your support of your ally who's in the middle of a war. You show Russia that you're not going to back down, that we're not tired of supporting Ukraine in this, that they're not going to be able to just hang on and tire us out, and eventually Ukraine will lose all of its support from its allies, and then Russia can do whatever they want to do, basically annex Ukraine back into Russia, which is their goal. It shows that, no, that's not how it's going to go. We're in it for the long haul. We're committed financially, and Ukraine is our ally. We stand with Ukraine against Russia.
Well, and he also gave a very powerful speech calling out Putin in the meantime as well. So I agree with you. I thought he did all the right things. It's what a president should be doing. There's been a lot of talk about how this is more evidence that Biden's up for re-election, I guess you could say. Right? Oh, he's 80
That's the only reason he's doing this.
I know. Well, I mean, I'm sure
you could say that about anything he does at this point.
No kidding. But I'm sure that was actually part of the plan too, to be honest, if you want to be real cynical about it. But having an 80-year-old president going to a war-torn area, giving a speech saying basically the middle finger to Putin, I thought that was a good thing. Good job, Joe. I'm proud of you. But not everybody is proud of Joe. In fact, there's been a ton of criticism from the right, especially Fox News, the super credible, fair and balanced news source that we just talked about, who actually hate that Joe Biden went to Ukraine because he hates America.
Yep. He left the country because he just can't stand being here.
Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted out, quote,
someone who knows how to use a keyboard tweeted out.
This is incredibly insulting. Today, on our President's Day, Joe Biden, the President of the United States, chose Ukraine over America while forcing the American people to pay for Ukraine's government and war. I cannot express how much Americans hate Joe Biden.
Why did Ukraine invade Russia?
But again, this just goes to show, like, why are we going super weirdly pro-Putin with this? Why do we not want to help our ally in Ukraine? Why do we not want to help literal democracy stay in place? Like, Jesus, like, yes, we can talk about America in foreign wars and America that should be, like, staying the hell out of other areas. I totally get it, right? American colonialism at its best. But this is also kind of one of those times where we're actually kind of doing somewhat the right thing here. And they hate it.
Well, because Joe Biden is a Democrat and they're Republicans. That's the reason. Look how she ended it. I cannot express how much Americans hate Joe Biden. What she means is I cannot express how much I hate Joe Biden.
Oh, of course. And Fox News revved this up even more by saying that Joe Biden abandoned East Palestine, Ohio during its craziest time yet.
Again, we talked about last week, the governor of Ohio has to declare a state of emergency.
But do you know who was in Ohio?
I do, in fact, know who was in Ohio.
And you could see it by the picture in front of you, standing proudly with a MAGA cap on in a McDonald's in East Palestine,
his favorite
Ohio, is Donald Trump.
You know, wherever he is, he's going to the McDonald's there.
And I just love the quoted tweet. The leadership, take notes, Biden.
Handing out his Made in China, Make America Great Again hats at the local McDonald's.
Fox News had the mayor of East Palestine on to talk about how furious he was that Joe Biden would just leave them in their time of crisis. You have Trump feuding with Pete Buttigieg, saying that it's...
Who was there, by the way.
Who also was there, by saying that Joe Biden isn't doing anything, he's a terrible president, and with Buttigieg saying, you do realize it was your administration that made stuff like this happen, right?
You are the ones that are pro-corporation. Like, this was a private corporation that caused this disaster.
Yes.
This was a problem of non-government regulation.
We talked about this last week.
We
why this happened.
A lot about it, and it's because we don't want to do anything to hamper businesses from making profit.
Of course.
That's why this happened, and that is a Republican goal. It's the biggest platform that the Republicans have.
And have always had.
Unfettered, laissez-faire capitalism. That was the cause of this. The Republicans are the biggest champion. I'm not saying the Democrats aren't. Way too many Democrats are also the same way. But if you're going to attack someone from the right, you have nowhere to stand on this issue.
It's just gross, man. And again, just to constantly conflate these two very bizarre, not at all separated issues and trying to attack Joe Biden over nothing at this point. Like, I don't know what should be done to appease these people anymore. Because if Trump was president and he went to Ukraine, they would have been all over him. What a brave man with so much courage. He knows how to stand up for our country and make sure he represents us well.
For Wisconsin sports fans, it's basically if Brett Favre would criticize Aaron Rodgers for constantly talking about retirement and not making up his mind. It's essentially the same thing.
Yep, pretty much.
And stealing welfare money.
Yeah.
M&Ms will not be satisfied until every last cartoon character is deeply unappealing and totally androgynous. Until the moment you wouldn't want to have a drink with any one of them. That's the goal. When you're totally turned off, they've won.
Boy, ain't right.
For our Foxed in the Head segment this week, this is actually a little bit older, but we had all the Super Bowl stuff last week.
And we just had to talk about this.
Yeah, so we decided to push it off. This all started when comedian, former late-night talk show host Chelsea Handler, for a skit on The Daily Show, presented a obviously satirical skit entitled, "This is a Day in the Life of a Childless Woman," which basically showed how her life is so great without the burden of children, without the hassle of having to do everything for your kids, and how she was able to live her own life.
Did you see the video?
I did. My wife's kind of a big Chelsea Handler fan, so she watched it. She enjoyed it.
Well,
we don't have any kids, so it's for us basically.
But I think, like, okay, let's really hit the point home then on this. It was, like, in a fun way, very stupid. It was a very stupid skit. It was intentionally to be, like, increasingly dumb as it went along. along, right? This was not supposed to be like an actual serious message in any way, shape, or form. I mean, a part of like her schedule as a child's woman was to go back in time and kill Hitler.
She said that she had gained superhuman powers.
Right.
Yeah, it was not trying to be serious. It was obviously a joke, something that conservatives don't understand. Just watch any Jim Brewer sketch in the last 10 years.
Oh. And of course, conservatives went absolutely crazy because
that's
don't
what they do.
Anything. Anyone from Tucker Carlson to Ben Shapiro all had opinions about this and all had to take their shots at Chelsea Handler to say how a horrible woman she actually is.
Because she's telling other women that they don't have to bear children to have a fulfilling life.
But none of them compared to Tucker Carlson's guest. I don't know his name and I don't care. Wasn't Jesse something?
Jesse, yeah. It's Jesse in the clip. That's the only time I've ever seen this guy.
It's D-Bag Jesse. That's all we need to know. Who went on a crazy rant on Fox News.
On the Tucker Carlson show.
Do you want to read it or you want me to read it?
I can read it.
Go for it. Give me your best like Don Jr. impression.
I can't. We don't have enough cocaine. That's what you see women like Chelsea Handler, feminists like Chelsea Handler, going with now. They've been lied to by their society forever. Their society, because it's different than the one we live in.
Oh, of course.
That you could be a girl boss, and you can do anything a man can do.
Because that's such a bad thing.
Which everyone who's ever seen a woman back up a vehicle knows that's not true.
Cool. Just throwing some random misogyny in there. That's great.
And like old 80s stand-up jokes. Like,
didn't you know women can't drive?
Women can't drive, guys. And that women can do anything a man can do. What's Chelsea Handler? You know she's like a rich and famous comedian, right? Who has been extremely successful by any measure. I know her name. I don't know who Jesse is.
Well, that's the best part about this, is that he's trying to punch up while simultaneously punching down. And the only thing he hit was his own crotch.
Jesse goes on to say, but either way, they've been told that they should do career and don't do a family or anything like that. And soon your Chelsea Handler, I wish. Soon it's Valentine's Day and your womb resembles a dried up tumbleweed blowing down an old western town.
What is this 4chan level garbage?
And your Valentine's Day date for the 10th year in a row is a 10-year-old copy of Magic Mike and a half-full bottle of Xanax.
Jesus Christ, dude. Have some subtlety.
And you're trying to pretend like you're happy, but you're not happy. You're not happy like I'm happy, can't you tell?
Can't you tell? As I'm talking about you, you should know that you're not happy, because I'm not happy. I'm really happy. I mean, you know what I'm saying, right? I'm really good. Like, you should call me something.
I'm very fulfilled, and so is my wife. And it's actually not her fault. She's been lied to by a country that has lost its way.
And I didn't put it in here because we would just read the entire segment verbatim if I had to. But like, before all of this, the balls on this guy, man. The balls on this guy to then introduce this whole thing by saying that he's a stupid person and got a 0.0 GPA in college and dropped out.
But I do know that women can't drive and that they should do a family and not do career.
Oh my God.
I'm guessing English was one of the classes that he failed.
That he'd never attended? You have to actually try.
You're not truly successful as a woman unless you pump out a bunch of kids. That is the message.
Well, and I think that's the point with this whole thing too, where yes, everyone's ridiculing this because it's so explicit and overt, but that's always been the message. We still see that today. You see that in the pro-life movement. You see that in the labor debates that we're going to talk about actually in a little bit, weirdly enough. It's all about controlling women and telling them what they have to do because they are seen as lesser than in this country.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
So this is our final episode for Black History Month this year, and we wanted to use it talking about Dr. Martin Luther King.
This has certainly been covered. We're not the first ones to go down this road.
No.
There is, and I wore my Some More News shirt specifically because they do have an amazing episode on this exact topic. And I mean, I know what you're all thinking. Cody Johnson is certainly no us, and of course you're correct. But you know, he gave it his best.
We don't have a puppet though. That's SoundCloud.
We do not have warm bow. But give that search for that sketch, or that episode of Some More News. I think it's called the same thing that we called this, the whitewashing of Martin Luther King.
In our defense, we did not name it because of that. It's just that all white men think the same. That's the problem.
We are a monolith.
Yeah. We're just good at colonialism and imperialism. We just go and just take other people's stuff. That's what we do as white men.
Mm-hmm. But I wanted to start off with, and we're talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and kind of how his message has been appropriated and how he's presented to the American people in the modern times, and mostly by conservatives, but also you'd see liberals doing the same thing, and kind of how his image has been sanitized and whitewashed since his death. So the first article that I want to talk about here is from Democrats.org, the War Room. And it basically talks about all of the Republican lawmakers that have used Martin Luther King as a puppet. Usually on Martin Luther King Day is the only time they ever talk, or if they're introducing legislation that Martin Luther King would have marched in the streets against.
Yep.
They'll usually bring him up, but we've got Senator Mitch McConnell, his quote, "Nearly 60 years since the March on Washington, Dr. Martin Luther King's message echoes as powerfully as it did that day. His legacy inspires us to celebrate and keep building upon the remarkable progress our great nation has made toward becoming a more perfect union." Of course, Mitch McConnell voted against the Voting Rights Act, which is exactly the opposite of something that Martin Luther King would want. So he'll use him as a puppet and then do exactly the opposite. They also have, I'm not going to read them all because we'll be here forever, but they've got a quote from Lindsey Graham, of all people, also invoking Martin Luther King, talking about how he was such a great fighter for social justice.
Oh, shut up. Yeah, Lindsey Graham, the super woke social justice warrior over here. Jesus Christ.
You've got Rand Paul, who thinks that businesses should be allowed to segregate based on race, invoking Martin Luther King on Martin Luther King Day, saying his courage should inspire us to redouble our commitment to working together for change.
I want you to read this Ron Johnson one over here.
We'll skip. There's John Cornyn of Texas as well. I mean, we know what laws that they have. But yeah, let's go to Ron Johnson, our own senator from Wisconsin. "Today, I'm taking a moment to remember the sacrifices of Martin Luther King Jr. We will always be grateful to him."
The sacrifices. Not that he was literally murdered, but the sacrifices he made.
Right. The same guy who wants to get rid of our Wisconsin Election Commission, turn it over to the gerrymandered Republican state legislature, and make it as hard as possible for black people in Milwaukee and Dane counties to vote. The guy who wanted to literally overturn the last presidential election, that same Ron Johnson, such a big Martin Luther King fan. And there's even a example of Steve Scalise retweeting a GOP tweet commemorating Martin Luther King Day. Steve Scalise also famously voted against the Martin Luther King holiday twice in his state of Louisiana.
Oh my God.
Huge Martin Luther King supporter, but voted against the recognition of the holiday in his state. The latest example that we have comes from Chip Roy when he was talking about the nomination of Byron Donalds and Hakeem Jeffries for Speaker of the House during that protracted battle. His quote, "For the first time in history, there have been 2 black Americans placed in nomination for Speaker of the House. However, the however is always great. We do not seek to judge people by the color of their skin, but rather the content of their character."
And there is the quote.
It's always the same damn quote. Every time. And I'm not going to read all the quotes. I'll just give you a list of people that I just found a couple compilations that show Republican lawmakers invoking that same quote over and over and over and over again. Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley, Newt Gingrich, Ron DeSantis, Kevin McCarthy, Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Ted Cruz, Glenn Youngkin.
It keeps going.
And yes, and you can go on and on and on and on, but everyone quotes that same part of the speech, and it's usually to show why we shouldn't have social programs, you shouldn't talk about black history, you shouldn't do anything to help the cause of black Americans at all, and we should completely forget about slavery and racism because of that one piece of one speech that Martin Luther King gave in 1963. Judge people by the color color of their skin, not the content of their character.
Even in Wisconsin, and this is happening right now, Republicans are still using that in legislation today. I'll link it in the actual show notes. Wisconsin Senate Joint Resolution 7. This was sent an advisory referendum to Wisconsin voters on whether they support teaching of a false narrative of racist and gender indoctrination that does not belong in the classroom. That is literally in the bill. From the co-sponsorship memo, which actually gets sent out to all the legislators who sign on to it, it said, quote, "This advisory referendum would empower parents to continue the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his dream that we judge our children and our children's children not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character."
And of course, this ties back to our previous story about the Wisconsin State Supreme Court election that's coming up, because why do they want to add this totally nonsensical resolution?
It is a purely political resolution to just inflame and get people raged right before the same election for the Supreme Court.
And to get conservatives to come out to vote, knowing that this resolution is on the ballot.
Quite literally. So literally using Martin Luther King as a political pawn.
As a puppet. They're literally, if they could dig up his body and jam their hand and puppet his skull.
Thanks for the imagery. I really appreciate that.
You can see me too doing the things that nobody else can.
Now I'm imagining like with the
warm bow, but it's Martin Luther King, and it's like, you should vote yes on this Senate Joint Resolution 7. That's exactly what they're doing, and it's disgusting.
Absolutely. Even dumber. I actually did find this from that same video from the Some More News segment. Fox News' Greg Gutfeld even did an entire segment proposing the idea of an MLK dream score. In the segment, he talks about how you can't figure out who is better for black people when you're talking about politicians because charisma just does way more than actual actions do, or what Greg talks about, words over actions. And he says that that's why Obama was so popular, because he nailed the charisma, but his policies did less for blacks than the casting director of Friends. Cool. And then he also went on and said about how Trump was actually the best for black people because he did such a good job, blah, blah, blah. So he wanted to propose a quote.
Trump would agree with that too.
Right. Well, he did multiple times.
Yeah.
So that's why he proposed a quote, MLK dream score. I'm not kidding. That says it solves the problem by scoring candidates using the principles embodied in the MLK speech.
The only thing they know about Martin Luther King.
Quite literally. And it's easy. You create a website, MLKdreamscore.com, which has the actual speech.
All the kids go to websites these days. Right.
And then a scorecard with a selectable map of your country. You can visit your state, find your candidate, and their dream score. It's like fantasy football, but for politicians.
What? This guy had never played fantasy football? It doesn't seem like.
He goes on to visualize what would happen with this dream score and says, quote, so Obama would get a low score because although he was cool, you can tell he's speaking to the black people in the audience. Oh my God. He's going to turn his hat around and,
yo, bro,
and sit backwards in a chair really quick.
What it is, blood.
But although he was cool, his policies left blacks cold. Biden would score 0 for excusing physical violence at protests, creating polarization by branding people racist, and having no interest in a, quote, beautiful symphony of brotherhood.
All of that was 100% accurate.
So,
and not just completely out of Greg Gutfeld's head. We'll say head.
Right. So while we're talking about MLK and what he's actually done and what he actually said, I want you to keep these things in mind. It's not the color of their skin, but the content of their character. How Martin Luther King was a very non-violent, peaceful protester, and he wanted civility over anything else. And he wanted people to be colorblind more than anything else as well.
Right. Completely colorblind society. We're all equal. No preferential treatment.
An equal society, right?
Yeah.
So let's dive into what Martin Luther King actually did and said. And let's start with the I Have a Dream speech, where that one quote is quoted from all the time. Well, let's start actually with the event where the I Have a Dream speech comes from.
What was it called?
We all know the March on Washington. Jason just quoted, Mitch McConnell.
Most inspirational moment of Mitch McConnell's life.
Yes. Except the full title of that march was not just the March on Washington. It was actually the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where King called for raising minimum wages, increasing job mobility, expanded voting rights, education funding, housing rights, you name it. A socialist dream.
And he literally said, America has written a check to its black citizens, and that check check has come up insufficient funds. So we are here now for our check. That's literally what he said in that same very speech. And that's an idea that Republicans would be aghast at. But yet they'll take the other part of the speech saying that he dreams of a day when his children would be judged merely on the content of their character and not on the color of their skin. That we're not here, but I hope that one day I aspire that my children would live in that world after all of the other things that he was calling for happen. And we still have not got there. That check is still never cleared. But yet Republicans want to skip to the someday I wish that we would all be equal.
Correct.
And just say, well, that's what he wanted. He wanted us to all be equal and be treated equal. But they'll get rid of all the other part about having good jobs and benefits and all of the things that were given to white people by the government for 200 years while his people got chains and whips. Don't worry about that part.
And while many people know the I Have a Dream speech, they probably don't know his thoughts regarding the speech 3.5 years later. During a 1967 interview with NBC, King said, quote, "I must confess that the dream that I had that day has in many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith for the future. But I have had to analyze many things over the past few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficulties ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think that the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go, and we are involved in a war on Asian soil, which if not checked and stopped, can poison the very soul of our nation." Now, for reference, that war on Asian soil was a reference to the Vietnam War, which King strongly opposed.
And he said that the war basically makes people care less about the things going on in their own country.
Correct.
It makes people bloodthirsty and less likely to want to help their fellow citizens. It takes that attention away from the social issues. And as you can see, we are constantly fighting these wars instead of doing anything to help people here. And I have another quote about Vietnam.
There's going to be a lot of quotes
that I wanted to add in here. And yes, I'm sorry, you're going to have to listen to me instead of Martin Luther King. Maybe you can pull up some of these speeches on your own and listen to him. He's a much better orator than even Joe and myself are. I do apologize. "As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightfully so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government."
So this is pretty far along from the I Have a Dream speech, wouldn't you say?
It's certainly a far cry from the view of Martin Luther King that...
It's from the one sentence that everyone quotes.
That one speech, that version of him. Even like you go to the monuments in Washington and the quotes that they have around there, it's nothing like that. It's such a sanitized version. Dr. Cornel West calls it the Santa Clausification of Martin Luther King, that he's portrayed as this caricature of who he really was. And it's done like that for white people.
Yes. Another thing you may not have known about Martin Luther King was that he was a big labor activist. Shocking from the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, right? Dr. King gave numerous speeches and participated in many worker strikes for different labor unions such as AFL-CIO, AFSCME, UAW, and many others. And while we won't go into all the details of all those different quotes and speeches, I'll actually include a link that has all the different quotes from those speeches to these labor unions. He also came out very strictly against right to work. Wow, a very modern term. For those of you who don't know, right to work, it's basically a tool to destroy unions and collective bargaining agreements all across the country. Wisconsin is one of the right to work states, and this is a lot what Act 10 was about. So keep in mind when Dr. Martin Luther King says these things, they are directly applicable to what Republicans are doing today. Quote, "In our glorious fight for civil rights, we must guard against being fooled by false slogans rights, such as right to work. It is a law to rob us of our civil rights and job rights. Its purpose is to destroy labor unions and the freedom of collective bargaining by which unions have improved wages and working conditions for everyone. Wherever these laws have been passed, wages are lower, job opportunities are fewer, and there are no civil rights. We do not intend to let them do this to us. We demand this fraud be stopped. Our weapon is our vote.
And Martin Luther King was killed while in Memphis supporting a black sanitation worker strike. So he worked for labor activism literally up until the day he died. Was assassinated, whatever you want to say.
So whenever a conservative starts telling you about how much they hate unions, tell them they hate Martin Luther King too. Another thing that Republicans are probably hating the fact that he was that Martin Luther King studied communism and he leaned socialist. That's right, he's much more akin to Bernie Sanders than he is to Rand Paul.
He understood that capitalism was one of the biggest issues with our country and the reason why nothing was being done to help anyone, saying that he thought capitalism was a failed system.
In his 1958 memoir, he reported that although he rejected communism's central tenets, he was more sympathetic to Marx's critique of capitalism, finding the gulf between superfluous wealth and abject poverty that existed in the United States morally wrong. In his 1967 book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community?, King warned about America's morbid fear of communism, arguing that it prevented people from embracing a, quote, revolutionary spirit and declaring eternal opposition to poverty, racism, and militarism. And he's right, because, like Jason said, capitalism is entrenched within the people around it, and if the people who are using capitalism are all super racist, capitalism is just a tool to maintain those status quo means.
In a 1952 letter to his future wife, Coretta Scott King wrote, "I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic, and yet I am not so opposed to capitalism that I have failed to see its relative merits. It started off with a noble and high motive, to block the trade monopolies of nobles. But like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing it was revolting against. So today, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. It has brought about a system that takes necessities from the masses to give luxuries to the classes."
So literally, if Martin Luther King was alive today, you would be seeing ads about him nonstop calling him a radical leftist extremist.
Where is the Republican lawmaker quoting that Martin Luther King?
I do not see them. One thing that we also should be pointing out is that there were definitely riots during the civil rights movement. It was not 100% perfectly peaceful, and it was not just white people hosing down black protesters who were trying to be peacefully protesting in the streets. There was lots of violence, and those have been known as the 1967 riots, also known as the Long Hot Summer of 1967. 158 riots erupted in cities all across America, sparking outrage from white residents all over the place, much like the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. So when you saw people talking about how the burning buildings and all this other craziness and the blacks just need to learn how to cooperate and learn how to do things the quote-unquote right way. That's what happened during the civil rights movement to a T. You know, Jason, I even still remember when we had that one argument with a friend of ours and you had to literally show him the political cartoon.
Yes.
I'll let you describe it.
It was basically Martin Luther King in front of a bunch of destroyed buildings talking about the peaceful marches that he's been involved in. And that's how it was seen. It was seen that, no, all they're doing is destroying these cities, burning and looting everything. The same things that you hear from the protests following the death of George Floyd. It's the same thing we saw down in Kenosha after the shooting of an unarmed black man that left him paralyzed here. It was, they're destroying the cities. Someone has to stop this. This is not anything that we can put up with. This is not how you go about protesting.
Well, it goes even further than that, though, Jason, because it's also the communists are coming and destroying our cities and our neighborhoods. Because that's their thing, too, is that they're also labeled as communists the entire time they had the civil rights movement, much like they had with the Black Lives Matter movement. And even though MLK was known as a non-violent protester and wanted peace and civility, he also understood the point of rioting. This is a quote from his The Other America speech. "Today, all of our cities confront huge problems. All of our cities are potentially powder kegs as a result of the continued existence of these conditions. Many in moments of anger, many in moments of deep bitterness, engage in riots. Let me say, as I've always said, and I will always continue to say, that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. I'm still convinced that nonviolence is the most potent weapons available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom and justice." There's your peace and civility we usually hear about Dr. Martin Luther King. He goes on to say, though, but at the same time, it is as necessary for me to be as vigorous in condemning the conditions which cause persons to feel that they must engage in riotous activities, as it is for me to condemn riots. I think America must see that riots do not develop out of thin air. Certain conditions continue to exist in our society, which must be condemned as vigorously as we condemn riots. And in the final analysis, a riot is the language of the unheard, a quote many of you probably have heard before, actually. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last few years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear the large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice, equality, and humanity. So, super big Antifa supporter, MLK, coming out here saying that we need to tear some things up.
It's the only way anything ever changes.
He also gave another speech regarding rioting as a social phenomena during a speech to the American Psychological Association. Quote, urban riots must now be recognized as durable social phenomena. They may be deplored, but they are there and should be understood. Urban riots are a special form of violence. They are not insurrections, January 6ers.
Unlike, yeah.
The rioters are not seeking to seize territory or to attain control of institutions. They are mainly intended to shock the white community. They are a distorted form of social protest. The looting, which is their principal feature, serves many functions. It enables the most enraged and deprived Negro to take hold of consumer goods with the ease the white man does by using his purse. Often the Negro does not want what he takes. He wants the experience of taking. But most of all, alienated from society and knowing that the society cherishes property above people, he is shocking it by abusing property rights. There are thus elements of emotional catharsis in the violent act. This may explain why most cities in which riots have occurred, even though the causative conditions remain. It is also noteworthy that the amount of physical harm done to white people other than the police is infinitesimal, and in Detroit, whites and Negroes looted in unity. So we have a pro-looting stance.
And I 100% agree with the, knowing that the society cherishes property above people.
Yes.
Because that's been proven over and over and over again. What did we see in Kenosha?
Or in Milwaukee, or in any other of the Black Lives Matter protests.
We literally had sanctioned murder to defend property.
And I'm still thinking about all the people who have pushed for, and literal legislation has been pushed into place as well, that allow people to run protesters over with their car if they're inconvenienced by them. These conservatives do not care at all about Martin Luther King. They are lying to you because they're exactly the same types of people who would be doing all the same things to Martin Luther King back in the 1960s. It's also worth mentioning that there were tons of other riots after Martin Luther King was assassinated as well. This was also known as the Holy Week Uprising of 1968. So this is not just a Martin Luther King thing. This is not just a civil rights movement thing. When people are scared and oppressed, they will lash out.
And it's not just conservatives.
No.
That Martin Luther King was fighting against. He made it very clear that white moderates were a big problem, something that we personally, being progressives, are also constantly fighting against. The moderates, what I consider to be liberals, the people that, they might support most of the issues that I support, they're still fighting for the status quo all the time. And we have a quote from the famous letter from the Birmingham jail that Martin Luther King wrote. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal that you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I certainly can't say it better myself. He didn't put kill Whitey at the end of that. I probably would have, but I agree.
But I really, for those listening, I want you to think about to yourself, have you or have anyone you ever met ever said the words, I agree with you in the goal, but I can't agree with the methods? Have you ever said that or know someone who said that about Black Lives Matter?
I've definitely said that about some, like you'd say, people stopping traffic and stuff like that, shutting down things. I have definitely said those words. I agree with the goal, but I don't agree with the method.
You have to understand that if you do those things without understanding what's actually happening, you are an obstacle, not an ally. And if you do those things and also say you support the message and the supposed dream of Martin Luther King, you have to know you are being hypocritical. The whitewashing of Martin Luther King was intentional, purposeful, and all meant to give white people more power. And that happened from the time that he was already on the streets, when they called him a extremist, communist, a rioter, someone who hates America, to his literal assassination and his death, and what we've been teaching about him for the last 60 years. Do not fall for it anymore. Do not fall for conservatives who are on Fox News or your crazy uncle or aunt who are trying to tell you that they like Martin Luther King or that they wish people were more like Martin Luther King today, because they wouldn't. They would hate him just like they hate people today.
They probably did hate him in the 60s if they're old enough, because I guarantee that every one of those conservatives that quotes Martin Luther King on Martin Luther King Day, or like a Ron DeSantis that quotes Martin Luther King literally while signing a bill that would prohibit the teaching of what he really taught, everything we went over today.
Well, or literally banning AP African American Studies.
Those people never supported Martin Luther King in the 60s. I guarantee it. And if they did, they have changed their political views over the years. So don't be fooled by their puppeteering.
Don't let others be fooled by their puppeteering, and call it out when you see it. Because if you want to actually live by the message of Martin Luther King, be an actual ally and remind people what Martin Luther King actually stood for.
Kill Whitey.
Oh my God. Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in the next episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at ThinkProPod. You can email us at thinkpropod@gmail.com. And remember, when in doubt, think progressively.
Do you even want to do the Marjorie
We
Taylor
don't
Greene?
have to. I mean, it's a very, like...
She could always be in this.
Right.
Should have called it Marjorie Taylor Greene Says. Yeah. Don't even give her the... I like
well, I mean,
that.
it was just a dumb tweet to it. It's just like, oh, we should have a national divorce.
I saw it.
Yeah, it's just dumb. Whatever.
All right. So, main segment.